Hello everyone, welcome back. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you had a good week. I finally decided to do my tarot history video. I prepared a slideshow this time, just in hopes of being able to make it a bit more coherent for you guys. So as you can see, it's going to be my thoughts on the secret history of tarot and how it relates to the Tartarian Empire, the new chronology, and the Arabian origins of Europe, right? So there are theories out there that Arabic is originally a European language, and that basically Islam finds its origin in Europe. Obviously, those are opinions that can be disputed, but for the sake of argument, I think that's an interesting perspective, and we'll get back to all this. So let's get started with some contents and disclaimers, some introductions. Obviously, this is not a definitive history, but like a series of thought experiments, right? So we're going to try and suspend our disbelief and try to think about some alternative takes on historical events. We'll be analyzing the history of tarot through the lens of the new chronology. We'll be taking the phantom time hypotheses into account by Fomenko, Heinzohn, Tristan, and others. Personally, I have my own theories about that. I don't exactly believe that. So the theory is basically that 1,000 years have been added to our history, right? And that, or rather, that there's a missing 1,000 years, and that those have been filled up with events that have been copied from one another, and there's a lot of duplicate events in history, right? And I do believe that is true, but I don't necessarily believe that the 1,000 years themselves have been added, right? I believe that a slice of history has been removed and has been replaced with copied events. So I do think the 1,000 years exist, and obviously there are theories about like the millennial kingdom and stuff like that, but I hesitate to believe that is what really happened in that time span, right? I do believe that the medieval, like what we call the Dark Ages, I prefer to call them the high Middle Ages. I do believe those existed, right? Those happened. Just probably in a different way than we suspect, and I think they were much more enlightened than we're led to believe. So, the phantom time hypothesis from Menko, Heinzohn, Tristan, etc. We'll be talking about Renaissance versus Antiquity, right? And obviously, once again, with the 1,000 years, with the missing 1,000 years, those could either be much closer to each other than we think, or they could be one and the same. And there are thoughts that support either one of those two. We'll be talking about the Phoenicians. We'll be talking about the Arabic origins and or influences of Europe. We'll be talking about Gnostic sects and church persecution. So if you're sensitive to that sort of subject, you might want to check out. We'll be talking about the language of the birds. This will be a concept that will reappear here and there during this presentation. It's a tough concept to explain, so I prefer to leave it in the background to do its own thing. We'll be talking about the Goths, the Moors, and the Palatines, which are terms that to me are almost more or less synonymous. And we'll discuss how the tarot connects to all of these concepts. So, why is the tarot significant historically? The tarot finds its origins in late medieval and early Renaissance periods, which points to suspect dating, right? As I noted earlier, Renaissance and Antiquity are seem to be much closer than we're led to believe. The philosophical and Gnostic imagery in the tarot points to chronological discrepancies as well, right? And that's an in extension of the first point. It seems to be combining Eastern and Western influences. So I put Eastern in quotation marks because it's not strictly Eastern, right? It seems to come from, depending on your perspective, right? If we assume that Europe was originally Arabic, or Arabic was originally European, if you will, right? And we know that the golden age of the Arabic golden age, for the most part, took place in Spain, right, which is the westernmost part of Europe. So if that influence comes from Spain, then it comes from the west. So it's not strictly Eastern. And obviously as well, a lot of the Arabic powers were in North Africa as well, right? Which is to our south. So this whole term of East and Orientalism is kind of misleading. We'll be talking about naming and spelling conventions. These are important to understand the nature of the tarot. We'll discuss the deliberate ambiguity, which points to its heretofore unknown origins. And once again, we'll be using the language of the birds to analyze its relevance. So first off, we'll get started with the Gothic connection. And basically this means we're directly jumping into deep waters, right? The Goths are a very mysterious chapter of history, and I've previously made a video about decoding the Goths, right? So if you haven't seen it, it might be a good idea to check it out. Although it's pretty murky, and I might have to redo it someday. But I believe the Goths to be very important in this whole thing, and I believe they are at the center point of what those 1,000 years were actually about. Right, so according to mainstream history, the Goths conquered Rome in 410 AD under Alaric I. They established kingdoms in Italy, in Spain, southwestern France, that lasted from roughly the 5th to 8th centuries. Again, that's what they say. But we also have references from the Goths that are allegedly, again, older than that, right? Also from the 4th century and so on. The Visigothic kingdom played an important role, according to mainstream history, in the transition from Roman rule to medieval Europe. Personally, I believe... Well, we'll get there. Personally, I believe they were both, basically, right? Roman rule and medieval Europe was one and the same, and the Goths were the center point of that. Allegedly, again, Al-Andalus assimilated the Western Gothic kingdoms. And again, this is debatable, and we'll get there as well. And then, obviously, in the east we have the Ostrogoths. They seem to be an offshoot from the Visigoths. They seem to have, either been the same thing and then split off after they conquered Rome, or they seem to have formed in the Balkans, in what's known as Pannonia, Byzantine Pannonia, or Balkan Pannonia, or something like that. And Pannonia is the area roughly around where the Yugoslav Republic used to be, until recently, until the 90s. So this area in the Balkans, but at the same time they seem to have expanded to Romania, Bulgaria, which was then still known as Thracia, to Greece, and to Anatolia. Right, and this is a very strange thing because we know even less about the Ostrogoths than we know about the Visigoths. Let me just check out one thing before we continue. So anyway, to get back to the term Ostrogoth, right? There's something interesting going on with the name, right? So Ost means east in German, right? And if we combine it with Roman, it's Oströmisch, right? Ost-Roman, which seems very similar to Ottoman. And not just that, we know, for example... We know, for example, that the founder of the Holy Roman Empire and the founder of the Ottoman Empire both had the same name. They're both known as Ottoman. Right? There's things like that. Aside from that, the greatest Ostrogoth king was Theodoric the Great. And his story is that he was taken hostage by the Byzantines and he grew up in Constantinople, enjoying a prestigious position in the Byzantine court, enjoying Roman education, right? Which is a similar story to all the later Balkan heroes like Vlad Tepes Dracul and George Castrio Skanderbeg, who were taken hostage by the Ottomans and grew up in the Sultan's court and enjoyed Ottoman education, right? And they were these sort of half janissaries that became national heroes of other Balkan countries. And the funny thing is that Theodoric the Great did the same thing, but then under Byzantine rule, rather Ottoman rule. This is all mainstream history, so a lot of this doesn't make sense because theoretically it seems, it seems to have been tampered with, this whole story. So he conquered various territories. He raided various Byzantine territories in Greece. He ruled over Italy. So there's a lot of discrepancies there, and then he fought Belisarius in northern Italy, and Belisarius was a great strategist of Emperor Justinian, and things like that. And we also have stories about Theodora. You have the secret histories of Procopius, who condemns Justinian and Theodora as being these ultra corrupt megalomaniacs, and basically the devil incarnate and things like that. And there's a bunch of stories of their of their interactions with the gods, right? So Theodora, there's a story of Procopius about Theodora having corrupted a Gothic princess who was like the epitome of innocence and beauty, and she I don't remember exactly what the story was, but she had invited her to hang out at the imperial court in Constantinople, and she was very happy to go there because she was interested in all the books and the knowledge they had and stuff like that. And I don't know I think she tortured her and stuff like that. She, like psychological manipulation and stuff. I remember exactly what the story was. But at the same time, Belisarius, he fought the Goths. He defeated them at first, but then he was routed. But then Justinian started taxing them to death. And then, the Justinian plague hit in 526 AD. So the majority of the Goths died out. And those specifically were the Goths in Anatolia, in large part. So things like that, strange stories. Obviously, the Justinian plague seems to have been some big cataclysm as well. So some people say it's a plague, but others say like there were other things involved, like natural catastrophes and things like that. And that is, we see that with other things as well. And it seems to be, that also seems to be like a copy of the Black Death. It seems to be the same event, but then transposed over different timelines and things like that. So all very strange and, and very vague. But so what we can conclude at any rate is that both Gothic kingdoms have very similar stories. Both have a tight relationship with the Roman Empire. So the Visigoths conquered the Western Roman Empire. The Ostrogoths settled around the Eastern Roman Empire. They're both eventually assimilated. Obviously, I didn't write this down quite correctly, but so according to mainstream history, the Visigoths were assimilated by the Andalusian Empire, while the Ostrogoths were basically assimilated by the Byzantine Empire, which was later taken over by the Ottomans. But the question is, are they perhaps one and the same? Right? Are the Goths both the Romans and the Ottomans and the Andalusian Empire? And then furthermore, are there any connections between the Goths, the Andalusians, the Ottomans, and the Holy Roman Empire as well? Right? And that's the reason why I bring that up, and I should have made a slide about that, is we see, for example, a lot of Arabic on German coins, right? We find them in Denmark, we find them in Germany, we find them even in Russia. Not only that, we find them on imperial vestments, right, of the Holy Roman Empire. So apparently, the German Empire, like Charlemagne or not Charlemagne, I don't remember which one it was, but like the German Emperor in Aachen, he wore a mantle with Arabic script and a crown with Arabic script. And the same goes for Ivan the Terrible and things like that. He also has a crown with Arabic script, saying the usual things like La ilaha illallah and things like that. So all that stuff. So, in order to determine that, we need to talk about the Aryan faith, right? So, we know from history that the Goths were Aryans. They were converted by Wulfila, who translated the Bible into their language. He was an Aryan bishop and missionary, and he was sent by the Byzantine Empire to convert the Goths. And from them, the Aryan faith spread among many Germanic tribes, among others the Saxons, the Lombards, many. So according to the mainstream history, the Goths founded different kingdoms around in the periphery of the Roman Empire, and a lot of them were Aryan. The Lombards are important because we'll mention them later on as well. So the Aryan faith was a Gnostic sect, which is interesting as well because we know that Gnostics existed during Hellenism in Alexandria, in Anatolia, and things like that. So in antiquity, but suddenly in medieval times they reappear, basically around 1,000 years later, right? We know that they were deeply influenced by Platonism, which is another strange anachronism. We know they rejected the notion of the Trinity. And there have been people like J. Smith, if you look him up on YouTube, you will find his lectures, who postulate that Arianism was the predecessor of Islam and that the Quran contains a number of Gnostic texts that have been incorporated into the Islamic canon. And we also know, or we allegedly, the Arian faith disappears around 671 AD, with the last Gnostic king. I don't remember what his name was. Let me see if I can find it. Arianism. Here you go. From the 5th to 6th century. Here you go. So Grimwald, king of the Lombards, was the last Arian king, and his young son successor Garibald, who died in 671. It seems like, or he was born in 671. I'm not sure. So, but then it suddenly resurfaces around the 16th century, with the rise of Protestantism, which is again funny, because this seems to be another anachronism, right? So Gnosticism disappears in antiquity, reappears in the Middle Ages, in the form of Arianism, among others. Arianism disappears in the Middle Ages and then suddenly reappears in the 16th century. And the 16th century is one of those eras that are very strange, where a lot of strange things are happening all at the same time. You have the 30 Years' War, you have all that stuff. And obviously it's one of the eras where the tarot comes into its own, right? In all this chaos. So we have a connection with Islam in the Aryan faith, right? And we have a connection with the fact that the Andalusians allegedly assimilated the Goths, but at the same time the Goths were Aryan. So if Islam, if Islam descends from Arianism, we might very well say that the Goths actually were the Andalusians, that they were the ones who founded the Andalusian Empire, and they started, maybe they adopted this new doctrine and they changed from the inside out, or they always were Arabic, right? Because there are theories that say that Arabic was a Germanic language, the original Germanic language, and we have the imperial vestments of the Holy Roman Empire and all the coins that are being found in Germanic countries that attest to that fact, right? So bear with me, because all this is important for what I'm going to say about the tarot, right? I'm not there yet. So before we get there, we need to talk about the Cathars and other early Protestant sects, right? I say early Protestant because they were technically not Protestants as such, because Protestantism started with Calvin and Luther. But they were similar in the sense that they were resisting the papal authority and rejecting it. So first off, we have Mithraism, which is not exactly, kind of falls out of that spectrum, because it was pre-Christian, right? And obviously, but we all know that it was a Gnostic sect again, or a mystery religion, like the Eleusinian mysteries and things like that, that almost became the official new religion of the Roman Empire. And Mithraism, borrows a lot from Gnosticism, and so on. But it was a military religion, and that's important as well, because we'll see that a lot of these beliefs were adopted by military men. Then we have Manichaeism, which is, tenuously connected. I believe it's interesting, but I'm not sure how related it is to this topic. But it was around the same era that existed as well. And it's considered one of the oldest world religions, right? Because it covered it basically covered the area from all the way from the Levant all the way to China, right? And there are Chinese Manichaean sects that exist to this day. East Asian Chinese, not necessarily Chinese, East Asian, enclaves, let's say, that still that still hold on to the Manichaean faith. But they obviously, it has been, it incorporates like Buddhist elements and things like that as well. Then we have the Guelphs and Ghibellines. I've tried to put these more or less in chronological order, right? And the Guelphs and Ghibellines are interested, and those are the first ones that we'll mention here. The first point that I think is intimately connected to the history of the tarot, right? Because this was a conflict that was happening in the north of Italy when it was still under Lombard and Holy Roman Empire control, imperial control. And this was a conflict between the Papists, the Guelphs, and the Ghibellines, who were the supporters of the emperor. And I find it interesting that the names are similar to elves and goblins, and this might be like a defamation tactic or something like that from the side of the Papists. But this, that's the language of the birds that is doing its thing here. And obviously, as I said, the Lombards were Arians as well, right, in the north of Italy, and this is around the time. But this is allegedly, this is like in the 13th century, so they were no longer really Arians anymore. But I think this is related in the sense that first off, the Ghibellines were a military order, right? So they were royalists, so they believed in the primacy of the emperor, so they were knights and warriors, while the Guelphs were priests, the priestly class, and their mercenaries. And obviously, for the most part, it was a political conflict. There were wars, but there were mostly like political conflicts. But at the same time, we do see, like, for example, the Italian city-states of that time, which were similar to the Greek city-states of antiquity. They were exchanging hands all the time, especially like Ferrara, for example, which I was researching earlier for this presentation, seems to have exchanged hands. First becoming like a Ghibelline stronghold, then for a short while becoming like an independent state, and then being taken over by the Guelphs and things like that. So then we have the cults of the Magdalene and the Black Madonna. This was mostly in the south of France. There are legends of Mary Magdalene arriving in southern France with Joseph of Arimathea. Most according to some theories, most likely pregnant with Jesus Christ's child, and things like that. And obviously from that, we have the Black Madonnas, which are these depictions of the Virgin Mary with dark skin and with her child in her lap. And there are theories that is Mary Magdalene instead, but that it's like a disguise for people to protect their faith, right? To prevent persecution. So then we have the Cathars and the Bogomils, and those are interesting as well, right? The Cathars are in Languedoc, that's in the southern France as well, and the Bogomils are in Bulgaria. And Bulgaria, as I noted earlier, is one of the regions that was occupied by the Ostrogoths, right? And they had similar beliefs. They were also a Gnostic sect with different Christological interpretations. The Cathars were pacifists, and they were genocided by the Church, by the Vatican. During the Albigensian Crusade, things like that. The Bogomils, I'd have to look up if they were persecuted, but it wouldn't surprise me, honestly. There's also a Bulgarian tarot, by the way. Let me check. Bogomils. Bogomilism, Gnosticism, as I said, Gnostics, Christology and the Trinity, opposition, the Logos was second person of the Blessed Trinity, blah blah blah. uh, it doesn't seem like they were strictly persecuted. Samuel of Bulgaria revolted against the Byzantine Empire. He relied on popular support of the movement. So, there are no sources of Bogomil persecution during his reign. So it doesn't seem like they were persecuted, which is interesting. That's very interesting, because that could indicate that they were basically always there, right? And if they were Goths, that could indicate that basically the Byzantine Empire or the Roman Empire in that area was ruled by the Goths rather than the Byzantines, if they weren't persecuted. So, but they were obviously persecuted by Justinian later on, or earlier. Actually, so this is later, right? So Justinian was around 500 AD, so this is around the 10th century, right? So then we have Calvinism and the Lutheran Protestantism, and then we have the Huguenots. The Huguenots are basically Calvinists, but in France. But they were also in southern France. And obviously, there's a lot of theories about the Protestants originally having been like Muslim or Muslim adjacent, right? And there's a lot of there's some books written about Arabs and Jews, Moors and Jews, basically Moors, escaping persecution from Spain and fleeing to Holland, to the Netherlands, and basically being accepted there under the condition that they become Protestant, at least publicly. So a lot of them were crypto-Muslims and crypto-Jews that had turned Protestant, right? But there's a lot of people like David Ewing Jr., for example, who claim that the Protestants were originally Muslim and then later on were kind of assimilated by Jesuit orders and things like that, and their whole doctrine was changed into Christian doctrine, as a psyop. So that's a big discussion. But we'll get back to those in later on as well, because they make a reappearance. And then we have the Jacobins, and I just thought I'd mention those because they're a little bit, they're allegedly they reject both atheism and religion, and they had their own, they wanted to found their own religion, which was like the Church of Reason, which would replace the Vatican and stuff like that. And they were those Phrygian caps, right? And this seems to point to the other the other direction the other movement, let's say, that we'll discuss in a minute as well. So to get back to the Roman Empire, I believe that Byzantium, or Constantinople, was the original Roman Empire, right? But the original in the sense of in the mainstream understanding of the word, right? So in the mainstream, in our mainstream history, we accept that Rome was the original Rome, right? The Roman Empire. After it fell, it was conquered by the Visigoths. They moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, and so that became the new Roman Empire. In my view, based on the new chronology, I believe Constantinople was the first Roman Empire, and then they later fled to Rome, and I'll explain this right now. So first off, Fomenko, for example, claims that Jerusalem was located on the Bosporus, and that was the even older city, which was later replaced by Constantinople. And this is basically on the other side of the Bosporus, right? So Constantinople is on the side of Europe, of the Balkans, while Yoros is right on the opposite side in Anatolia, right? But it's literally on the coast, overlooking the Balkans. And in Yoros, there's this place called Joshua's Hill, which I can show you. Which I can show you right away. Let me see. So we have Joshua's Hill here, which contains the tomb of Yusha, right? And it's a place of pilgrimage for Muslims, although it is kind of disputed. There are multiple potential tombs of Yusha, but they claim that Yusha was let's see, I can look it up for you. That he was related to here. To Moses, right? Come on, why does it go? All right. Joshua, also known as Yehoshua, right? Does that sound familiar? Yehoshua or Josue was Moses' assistant in the book of Exodus and Numbers, and later succeeded Moses as the leader of the Israelite tribes. The book of Joshua in the book of Joshua in the Hebrew Bible. His name was Hosea, the son of Nun, the tribe of Ephraim, but Moses called him Yehoshua, translated as Joshua in English. The name by which is most commonly blah 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 blah. Okay, so and people claim he was a giant as well. And then in Euros we also have the castle of Euros. And obviously the name Euros is very reminiscent of Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem, we say in Greek. So yeah, we have the castle of Euros, which is at the same location, roughly. And obviously, as you can see, you look straight across the Bosporus. So on the other side is Constantinople, right? And so according to Fomenko, Jesus Christ was crucified in Euros. And Constantinople became the new Jerusalem right after that happened. So, and I mean, there's a lot of theories about what happened there exactly, but my theory is that after that happened, the Pharisees basically staged a coup. And they took hold of the city of Jerusalem, and they founded Constantinople, right? They founded the new Christian doctrine. Basically, they took advantage of Christ's crucifixion to create a new religion. Even though during his lifetime, he was already leading that religion, and I actually believe that Jesus Christ, because for example, Fomenko also says that Fomenko believes that Jesus Christ was Emperor Andronikos Komnenos. I'm not sure about that specifically. That he was born in Crimea and that he moved to Jerusalem and became the emperor basically. But I do believe so. There's other theories as well that Jesus Christ and Julius Caesar were the same person, for example, especially because their names both start with JC, right? And there's different theories about that. So I think that was Robert Graves who claimed that. So there is an indication that Jesus Christ might have been the emperor of that Roman Empire that existed in this area, and that he was sacrificed, because you have this whole the golden bow and stuff like that. You have the sacrifice of the king and stuff like that, and maybe that explains his authority and how this religion grew up so fast, right? Because it was already established while he was alive, and then when he was killed, they staged a coup, and they quickly how do you say? What's the word again? They established the new Christian doctrine, right? Because originally I'll get to that in a moment as well. Originally, it was a different deal, right? It was a world religion, so it combined different elements. And obviously, what's also funny is, for example, if this is true that Jesus Christ was the emperor, right? Even in the Bible, it states this whole royal line, how he descends from the line of Solomon and David and Solomon, and from through his father Joseph, even though they say that he wasn't begotten by a man. And also from his mother, he also descends from certain royal Israelite families. So it makes sense that he would actually have been an imperial figure, but at the same time, you also have these legends of these emperors who disguise themselves as common folk, as beggars, and they go around and just to observe how people interact and how people live and things like that, right? So it could have been something like that. And that only after he died they realized who he really was, something like that. So after that happened, after they staged their coup, they held the Council of Nicaea, and they formed the Nicene Creed. And Constantinople basically became a rogue state, run by a priestly class of Phanariot apostates. So I call them the Phanariots here because the Phanariots are historically a class of priestly bureaucrats and intellectuals in Constantinople, right? So they were the administrators of the imperial families, and they persisted well into Ottoman rule, right? And they also ruled in Romania. And Romania is also interesting because, the name says it. It's Rome. It's related to Rome, and they speak a Romance language, basically. So they became the rulers of Constantinople, and they basically conceived of this Roman Empire thing. And what's also interesting, and I didn't mention this in this slide, but I believe the Phanariots are related to the Khazars, right? And so they are the Pharisees, they are the Jews, they are the Hebrews, or the Ashkenazi, if you like. And that is also where, for example, the name Kaiser comes from. Kaiser, Tsar, right? The Tsar of Russia. And all that stuff is all related etymologically to the word Khazar. So then we had the sack of Constantinople in 1204 AD, allegedly. So that was the Fourth Crusade, allegedly again, because I believe some of the Crusades may once again be copies of each other, and that actually the only real crusade that happened was the Fourth Crusade, which was the sack of Constantinople, which is at the same time the sack of Jerusalem, right? Which is funny too, because, for example, the king of once Constantinople was sacked, the emperor, the one who became the emperor, was the Flemish king or Flemish count, Baldwin of Flanders, right? And who became the king of Jerusalem during the First Crusade? There was Baldwin of Bouillon, right? That was the brother of Godefroy de Bouillon, right? And he was the one who founded the Templars, right? He was the leper, right? And Bouillon is also in Flanders, right? Godefroy de Bouillon was also Flemish, and Baldwin of Bouillon. So once again, we have these copies of historical events happening across, like, a difference of 200 years is not too much in this case. But once again, we have this thing happening. And so after the sack of Constantinople, we have the Frankish rule in Greece, right? So basically what I believe happened, and what Fomenko, I think, points at, is that, after this coup d'etat happened, was staged by the Phanariots, the Gothic kingdoms banded together trying to retake Constantinople. So first they came from the west. Those were the Franks, right? The Crusaders. They took Constantinople for a while, but the Byzantines took it back under the leadership of the Paleologos dynasty, Paleologos, which is another funny thing because like their name literally means Paleologist. So they, it's the same as archaeologists. They study the old things, right? So it's almost like they're saying, these people, they were already basically rewriting history. Right, so they retook Constantinople, and then 200 years later, which again I think it was less, right? I think it was maybe 70 years or something. I think in total Constantinople, as we know it today as Constantinople, may have existed for like 200 years max in total. So 200 years later, in 1453 AD. It was once again conquered, but this time from the east by the Ottomans. Oh, sorry. Come on. Okay, so then, when it was finally conquered by the Ottomans, what I believe happened is that the Phanariots fled Constantinople and they went to what is now known as Rome, right? And they founded the Vatican. They continued their story based on the Nicene Creed, and that's also where the donation of Constantine comes from, and that's all. So it's basically the same thing. But then instead, and I think that was something of like a safety measure, instead of continuing like as a ruling as a Senate or a council, the Council of Nicaea, they decided to elect a pope. And so it became a different structure, and they created this whole this whole genealogy, let's say, to explain how they descend from the Apostle Peter, and how they were the legitimate church authority, and so on and so forth. So. But they fled to Rome and they started the Renaissance there. And with the start of the Renaissance, they started rewriting history. They started converging chronologies, and they started writing the Roman history, which didn't exist before, right? And they created a whole fictional story about Rome. And this is attested, for example, by the Roman statues, right? If you look at the Greek statues from antiquity, those are idealized pictures, but idealized figures. But at the same time, you can tell that they are made in the Renaissance because they feature like, the anatomy is so accurate that it must have developed in the same time when they started to remove the taboos, or like. Yeah, remove the taboos around studying human corpses and studying human anatomy, and so on and so forth. But there seems to be a deliberate stylistic difference between the two, right? So Greek sculpture was like idealized, while Roman sculpture was realistic, and it was based around people's actual faces and so on. Which is funny because you can see the difference, because, for example, Byzantine sculpture was nowhere near the same quality, right? If we look at the sculpture of Constantine the Great, from that era, the Colossus of Constantine, right? And it's a colossal sculpture as well. It's nowhere near the quality of neither the ancient Greek, the classical sculptures, nor the Roman ones, right? If we look to Roman sculptures, let's see, I don't know, Julius Caesar, here, right? Oh, his face is already, well, this seems like a not particularly good one, but you can tell that this is better, or like this, you can tell that they were actually trying to create realistic faces, right? This is probably the best one so far. You know? So that points at these sculptures being made in the Renaissance. But then we have stories like, for example, Tristan says that, Plato and Platon are the same person, and that Platon introduced Platonism in Renaissance Italy. We'll get back to that later on as well, or we'll add some more details to that story. And that for Plato's corpus, before that, it had disappeared for another 1,000 years, and then suddenly reappeared in the Renaissance, and Platon had introduced it there, and stuff like that, with all kinds of different weird stories where, he was writing what he remembered, but then suddenly he found the original, and then so his own writings were kind of forgotten about, but we do have the original writings of Plato and stuff like that. These weird kinds of stories where you have these duplicates that happen at the same time and stuff like that. And then obviously, what I believe happens is while they were establishing the Renaissance, they started the Inquisition, and they started basically gaslighting the population and started reshaping their faith and their history as they were doing it, right? And they were doing it by terrorizing people and by killing people and by martyring people. And so what I believe is what the Vatican basically did, and what the terrifying implication of this is they as they were persecuting people, they were turning them into martyrs. So they were killing you, and then they were declaring you a saint. They were canonizing you, right? That was the Vatican tactic. And in this way, they eliminated opposition, and they created their icons and their new religion at the same time, right? On the bones of the native population. So, here are my theses, right? And I'll start with this. As you can see, originally, right, we have the cross and the crescent, and they were one and the same symbol, right? This has been pointed out by Fomenko. At some point, those were split, right? So the crescent became the symbol of Islam, and the cross became exclusively the symbol of Christianity. But originally, they were one and the same. The Gothic kingdoms were the original Roman Empire. That is my assertion. The Goths built the Gothic cathedrals. That's why they're called the Gothic cathedrals. Arianism was the original Catholic, i.e. universal faith. The lingua franca was Arabic, not Latin. I haven't gotten into much detail to explain this yet, but that's what I believe. Arabic is a Germanic language, and that is to say that it was spoken by Germans, right? If we look at German now, it doesn't have much in common with Arabic anymore, but there are still indications that they are similar, or that it's derived from Arabic, right? So for example, there are two examples I can think of the top of my mind, because I'm not an Arabic speaker, but for example, I happen to know that the name for throne in Arabic is arsh, right? And the word for ass in German is arsch, right? And obviously you sit with your ass on the throne, arsch, right? So, and we also have the arch, we also have all these terms, right? So it seems like they took that word and they inverted it, right? And they in order to ridicule it or to make it to diminish it, and they turned it into a like ours in English as well. Ours, we also say that, right? They turned it into an expletive. The other example, for example, that was brought up by David Ewing Jr. is the word safar. Safar in Arabic means traveler, right? Or traveler. In German, the word for seafaring, right? We say it in English as well. Seafaring is Seefahrt. And Seefahrt is funny because the German word for the sea is Meer, das Meer. Well, der See in German is the lake, but for some reason, seafaring is still called Seefahrt in German, right? So traveling, or a type of traveling in German is sefar, is similar to the word safar in Arabic. So there are some similarities that are kind of out there, but they still somehow exist for some reason, probably because the people were just simply still using those words, you know? So there are connections to be found between Arabic and German, as well as other languages, by the way. We'll get to those as well. The New Roman Church added 1,000 years to their chronology to distance themselves from the Gothic Empire, right, and to diminish the Gothic Empire. And they even though the Goths conquered Rome and they played such an enormous role in the early medieval age. In our history, all we know about them is that they kind of existed at the outskirts of the Roman Empire, which is absolutely not true, right? They were the Roman Empire. So, let's now finally get to the tarot. The early origins of the tarot come from the Mamluk playing cards, right? They were introduced in Europe, allegedly, again, by the Mamluks. Now, around the mid-14th century, specifically around 1370. That's what they say. The Mamluk Empire ruled over Egypt and Syria in around the 13th to 16th century. Now, if we look at the Mamluk Empire, there's some interesting stuff happening there as well. The Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. Mamluk Egypt, the Mamluk Empire, was a state that ruled Egypt, the Levant, and the Hejaz from the mid-13th to early 16th centuries, with Cairo as its capital. It was ruled by a military caste of Mamluks, freed slave soldiers. Slaves of whom? Right? That's another question we need to ask. Headed by a sultan. The Sultanate was established by the overthrow of the Ayyubid dynasty, Egypt blah conquered by the Ottoman Empire in 1517. That's another story, that they were conquered by the Ottomans. They were, I think, if you look at the Mamluks. Wait, where was the link here? Right? They look exactly like the Janissaries. They have almost the same dress. Only the hats are more like woolen hats. But the most enduring Mamluk realm was the knightly military class in medieval Egypt. Slave soldiers originally. And the Janissaries were also slave soldiers. Originally, the Mamluks were slaves to Turkic origin from the Eurasian steppes. So they were Scythians. But the institution of military slavery spread to include Circassians, Mongols, Abkhazians, Georgians, Armenians, Russians, Hungarians. Those are all the same people. Those are all Scythians. They're all from roughly the same region. What are we talking about? The Eurasian steppe guys is Tartaria. Right? You get where I'm going with this, right? And so from Tartaria they ruled somewhere, around here. And Fomenko has been saying the same thing, right? And David Ewing has been saying the same thing as well, that the Arabic region, right, was first of all, before the Arabs, the modern Arabs became a thing, it was actually settled by the Circassians, right? And the Circassians, they lived around here somewhere, around Crimea and stuff. So, all these people, like the Jongu, Scythia, Cimmeria, Sarmatia, Hunnic Empire, Sogdia, Jambé, Mongol Empire, Magyar tribes, and Goktur Khaganate, they all come from the same area. So what is the distinction? How are these different from each other, right? Yeah, okay, maybe the Armenians and Albanians, that might be a different thing. South Slavs. So it's like, how is this any different than the Ottoman Empire? It's the same thing. These are the Goths still, right? But anyway, I digress, right? This is the mainstream history that we're asked to accept here, right? So it was introduced by the Mamluk Empire, introduced through Spain and Italy, obviously, you know. Spain was Andalusia, so it was Arabic already anyway, and Italy was also under Gothic rule in the Middle Ages. People don't say it anymore, but it's still the same. You know, the Lombards. I believe the Lombards and the Goths are indistinguishable from each other. They're the same thing. And basically the same goes for the Saxons and the Palatines and the Cymri and all these people, right? It has 52 cards, just like modern playing cards. 4 suits, no faces, because it doesn't, you know, the Muslims didn't depict human figures. But it does have kings and, it does have what we would call court cards or faces, but they don't depict actual faces, right? So they have like I don't know what it is exactly. I haven't seen them. But they have a game that's called Kings and Admirals or something like that. So they have kings and admirals and stuff like that. So they have some characters, just like playing cards have their faces, right? And I covered this: Circassian, Turkic, and Mongolian Tartarian influences, right? So as I said, all these peoples that made up the Mamluk Empire, they were basically the Tartarians. Which basically means, as Fomenko says, that Egypt was under Mongol rule, was under Tartarian rule. So, let's proceed to the first Triumphi, the first tarot deck, right? And obviously, this is the oldest we know, but it's not complete, right? So we have different versions or different packs of the same cards, but they, you know, each of them has different cards that still exist, but there are 4 cards missing actually. Those are the Devil, the Tower, and a couple of other ones. So, the Visconti Sforza deck and the Heroic Triumphs, right? So, the Visconti Sforza is allegedly, it's the first deck of playing cards where the family of Visconti had commissioned an artist, and that was, I don't remember, well, let me check what his name was again. I should have written that down, but I can find all that stuff. Visconti Sforza Tarot is using his name was Bemba. I don't remember. Bonifacio Bembo, right? So they commissioned Bonifacio Bembo to paint these cards. They are hand painted, right? And they're done in this Gothic style. And it's clearly, you can tell it's a Gothic style. Now, what I want to point out, first of all, you know, the deck doesn't have much information about it, but what we do know is that this deck is the first appearance of the Popus, right, the female Pope, which was probably inspired by Manfreda da Pirovano, the first cousin of Matteo Visconti, sister of the Umiliati order, an order founded by Wilhelmina of Bohemia, who was a heretic as well, and she advocated for a matriarchal Christianity, and she believed that one day the church would be led by a female pope. Manfreda da Pirovano, which Manfreda, by the way, is a Germanic name, right? So she was a Goth. Was executed for heresy in 1300, and she was obviously burned at the stake. And this deck was made about 150 years later, right? Again, the chronology may be off, because I don't know if they remembered all this information for 150 years. But obviously, in those times, we have to keep in mind that people had a different estimation of time, and they had a different they kept this information around for longer, so they had a better idea of who their ancestors were and who they were related to and stuff like that, right? So maybe that information was preserved for 150 years and then incorporated into the deck. But as you can tell, even this oldest deck, of which people claim it was purely a deck for playing cards for aristocrats to play cards with, has at least one reference to a heretic, to a Gnostic heretic, that was burned at the stake by the papacy, right? So this is just to get you to prepare you for what's to come. Next up, we have the Tarocco Bolognese. And I may have mentioned this before in a previous video, but so this one is interesting. It's a lot more neutral, but it only looks that way because we have modern versions of this one that are made to the specifications of how this has been preserved, right? So first mentioned in 1442 in the city of Ferrara, as I mentioned before, this was gonna come up again. It only contains 62 cards, only 20 majors, of which there are 4 Moors, right? And these 4 Moors were originally 4 popes, right? So this deck had 4 popes, which was, instead of the popes, the empress, the emperor, and the pope, they had 4 popes, and one of which was the popes still. This was frowned upon by the church. They imprisoned the publisher. They burned down the printing house. And, after a while, after things calmed down a bit, they issued a decree, allegedly, again, that they would allow people to print these cards if they replaced the popes with these 4 Moors, right? And these 4 Moors are obviously a reference to the fact that these cards were introduced by the Moors, right? Obviously, my belief is different. I believe that these Moors, I believe that there were probably originally two Moors and 2 popes, to be honest, and they just replaced the other 2 popes with the Moors. But there are pictures of 4 popes, to be honest. Yeah, but the thing is, you could associate it with maybe like the 3 Magi, right? Of which, we know that I think it was Barnabas. He was a Moor. He's depicted as a Moor. Things like that. So there's the different theories. But what I'm trying to say is, I do believe that this is an acknowledgement of the fact that they were Moors, and that these cards were developed by the Moors, right? And that the Moors were Europeans. We have black Europeans. We have Islam in Europe, in Spain and in Italy and in southern France. We have Arabic being spoken in all these in the whole of Europe, right? And what's also notable about this deck is that it has the oldest known manual for divination with the cards from the same era, like from 1450 something. So these cards appeared like in Bologna in 1490 something, and they were henceforth associated with Bologna. And obviously Bologna is another interesting thing, right? So Bologna had all these towers in the Middle Ages, and I believe it was, something of a, it had one. It's known, I think, that it had the greatest university in at the time. Right, so all these towers could literally have been, like observatories and things like that, right? But anyway. Next, we have the oldest complete tarot deck with all 78 cards intact, and that is the Sola Busca Tarot. Now, this is a mysterious one, right? So we have 2 writers that have written some books recently. One of them is Peter Mark Adams, which is funny because he has literally the most biblical name you can think of, right? Peter, Mark, Adam. And he wrote a book about the Sola Busca Tarot, right? And he connects it to pre-Christian Gnosticism and paganism. So this is where it becomes interesting, right? Because now we have an indication, because this is a Renaissance deck that refers to pre-medieval, to Hellenism, to pre-Christian Gnosticism, right? And it refers to like Mithraic, Eleusinian, mystery traditions, mystery cults. And it has all these mysterious names and references and stuff like that. But at the same time, for example, right, if you look here, you have this Roman face who looks like an emperor, and you have this face that looks like a pope, right? In the Two of Coins. Which makes me think, who made this thing? So the Sola Busca Tarot came out in 1491 in Ferrara again. The first deck clearly designed for occult purposes, including many red and purple elements, which seem to refer to Phoenician traditions, as well as helmets reminiscent of seashells, right? The murex, right? So we have the purple clothes. You don't see them well here because this here you have this, right? And the purple is obviously the color of the royalty, right? And then we have those helmets like this one here, for example, or this one. Or, let's see. Yeah, you have more of them. You don't see them all here, but like, you know, I didn't want to show the whole deck now. Which look like snails, right? Like the murex. And obviously all the, like, that's not so obvious, but like all the scenery behind the characters is all like barren, right? And it looks like, you know, it could be it's reminiscent of like these mud flood stories that we keep hearing about. It depicts human sacrifice and other dark and disturbing elements. Also, the first deck to include all the trappings of modern tarot: Roman and Arabic numerals. So Roman numerals for the major arcana, Arabic for the minor arcana, for the pips, and has illustrated pips like this one, for example, which we see right away that it influenced the Rider-Waite tarot, right? And I always find it funny when I say right away that it sounds so much like Rider-Waite. Next up, we have the Tarot de Marseille, and this is the second big Renaissance tarot, right? And another writer who also co-wrote a book with Peter Mark Adams, Christophe Poncet. He also wrote a book about the Tarot de Marseille and his theory. He also wrote a documentary about it, by the way. So if you can't get the book, watch the documentary on YouTube. It's made by Arte. So if you look up the Tarot of Marseille documentary, you'll probably find it. And he claims that I've talked about this before. He claims that the Tarot de Marseille was designed basically by Marsilio Ficino, who was involved in translating Plato's works with the help of Platon and stuff like that. And Platon was also involved in this one, by the way, in the creation of this deck, according to Peter Mark Adams. But with the help of Platon, he translated Plato's works into Latin, right? And based on that, he created these tables with certain categories that were based on astrology as well, and these were codified into these cards, into the major arcana, right? But obviously the Triumphi already existed before that became codified, but he might have been involved in the tarot in general, or just in taking those Triumphi and further distilling them into the final form of these philosophical concepts, let's say, that were that we find in the Tarot de Marseille, right? So so most likely inherited in France via the conquest of Milan and the Piedmont in 1499. The Tarot de Marseille has been postulated by Christophe Poncet to have been designed by Marsilio Ficino as a mnemonic game to help students learn Platonic concepts in his Platonic Academy in Florence. So obviously we have another copy of Antiquity here, because Florence had a Platonic Academy, which seems to be just, Florence basically seems to be like a doppelganger for Athens, right? For Athens in antiquity, for classical Athens. So a lot of weird stuff, but at the same time, there's some things that don't really, that seem to have been added into this thing. For example, we still have the Popus, and we still have, some concepts that you don't quite see the relevance of Platonism right away. We will talk about the Tarot de Marseille in more detail later on, as well actually in the next slide. So, the anti-tarot. Sola Busca versus Marseille Tarot. Guelphs versus Ghibellines. That's what I believe, right? So my conviction, and I will explain this in a moment, right, is that the Sola Busca, right, even though it was published in Ferrara, I believe is based on clerical principles, and is based on the Phanariot and Semitic element that entered Italy via Greece. Right, and I think it's basically more Venetian and Phoenician than it is Gothic, right? Because it has these how do you say, these maritime elements, like the sea snail, the murex, and the purple, and the Pope here. The Pope as a concept, right? And not so much as his own cards, because the major arcana have completely different names. Have no relation to the major arcana of any other tarot deck, right? For example, here we have number 15 is Metelo, right? The only card that has anything in common with the tarot as we know it is Mato, right? The Fool. And it's funny too, because it's all Mato, and this is the only tarot deck from that time that actually has the number 0 as well. Which is interesting, because 0 is an Arabic concept as well, right? It was introduced with Arabic mathematics. So just to get this, this comparison done here, the Sola Busca has features Phoenician influences, like the snails and the purple. It's based on pre-Christian and pre-Hellenic symbolism, and I say pre-Hellenic because it's Phoenician, right? But obviously I believe personally that the Hellenes, the ancient Greek culture, was largely Phoenician in nature as well. It has a pagan, Gnostic, and malefic aspect. It's it seems to, Peter Mark Adams claims it was used for black magic. It is a highly Babylonian, clerical, occult, and Byzantine nature. The pips have influenced the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, ... and feature Arabic numerals. The Marseille, on the other hand, has Hellenic and Christian influences. And I say Hellenic because it's based on Platonism, right? It has a more... And maybe it probably Hellenic insofar as it's... I should maybe have said Hellenist, right? So it has these more like Egyptian influences, which Hellenist might not even be correct. It might actually be Arabic, right? It's based on Platonic and biblical symbolism. It has a Christian Gnostic aspect. And I say Christian Gnostic, not Christian mystic. Or Christian mystical. It is philosophical in nature. It has like an Arabic influence in the pips, but it has no Arabic numerals, and I will get back to that in a minute as well. It seems to be more Gothic in nature, but obviously the difference with the Visconti Sforza deck is that it's not hand painted, right? So the Marseille Tarot is actually mass produced, right? So they created these stencils, these wood blocks, and just created these stamps and then cut the sheets. And the major arcana it's made for for public distribution and for public use. And the major arcana is defined the tarot tradition at large, right? The major arcana of the Marseille Tarot, because the minor arcana are just pips, right? So the greatest influence from the Tarot de Marseille is the major arcana. Now, we get to the language of the birds and the Tarot de Marseille. So, what is the language of the birds? Now, this is gonna be a long story. I'm not gonna get into too much detail, but I'm gonna have to try to explain this for a little bit. But so the language of the birds has been postulated to be the encrypted language of the secret societies in Europe, right? And the secret societies, the sects, the heretic congregations, the mystical traditions, the mystery cults, things like that, and they all stem from the same sources, and so basically what the language of the birds does is communicate through symbolism. But there are, the symbolism is like basically works through wordplay and puns and things like that. And we see a lot of that, especially in the Tarot de Marseille, especially in the French titles of the Tarot de Marseille. The concept of the language of the birds was explained for the most part in The Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli, who explains like the alchemical symbolism that is present in the arabesques and in the stonework of the cathedrals themselves, and not so much in the religious iconography that is placed front and center, but like in the decorative aspects that are in the sidelines, let's say, right? And it's like the secret language that's been embedded in the stone, because obviously the cathedrals were built by the Freemasons, or we call them the Freemasons, but obviously I don't believe they were the Freemasons, because the Freemasons came around and co-opted this role in society, but they never actually built anything, while the original Masons were actually building the cathedrals. And they were, they followed this goth. They were goths. They were, and I mean, that was their culture. And they just perpetuated it even in hostile environments. And in order to do that, they had to go in hiding, continue their craft, but make their beliefs, transmit them in a more subtle way. We find them in the arabesques, right? The language of the birds. The arabesques, the word arabesque is interesting as well, because it suggests, obviously it's named that it's like the pseudo-Kufic, right? If let's look those things up, because I mentioned them before, but I haven't showed them yet. But obviously I've done so in previous videos, but it can never hurt. Pseudo-Kufic, right? Is that I showed it just earlier, right? Is that that idea that Renaissance and medieval and Renaissance artists were imitating Arabic script and putting it in their religious art, right? So you have Virgin Mary with Arabic script in her halo and on their clothes and stuff like that, and we have all these bishops with Arabic script in their halos and whatever, and we have imperial vestments and European coins with Arabic in them, and we have all that stuff. Stuff that once you start thinking about it, you start wondering like, where, like, how can you imitate something to such detail and not understand what it says, right? Either these people are like what kind of claim is that? Like, what kind of, like, and we know, like, for example, we know in the Middle Ages, like those churches, they were translating Arabic texts into Latin, right? They were translating the classics from Arabic, not from Greek. We know that they spoke Arabic, right? And it's the same in Renaissance Italy. And if we go a bit further and we start considering that maybe all these countries like Italy, Germany, Spain, France, and Anatolia and Greece, they were all speaking Arabic, right? Not because they were not because they were conquered people, but because that was their native language, right? And that was the lingua franca, because they were all Goths, right? Then it starts making a lot more sense, right? So we have Pseudo-Kufic, and then we have what was the other one? Arabesques, right? And arabesques are the same idea, right? It's a decorative pattern, and it's called arabesque because it resembles Arabic decoration in Arabic architecture, stuff like that, right? And we find the arabesques in the Tarot de Marseille, and I can show you right away. Right? Let me show you. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned that earlier, right? We have the Popus here with the egg next to her. Earlier I showed you Mary Magdalene with the red egg, right? So, and there are decks where the Popus is depicted with dark skin as well, like the Black Madonna. But right here, for example, right? These things are called arabesques, right? These decorative patterns around the pips, right? Like this. So, you know, we can see the Arabic influence here as well. So yeah, I will change screens back. Then we have the Provençal troubadours, right? The troubadours allegedly wrote love poems, just like Rumi did, for example. He wrote about wine and about the love for God and things like that, and he described him as his lover. And it's funny too, because Rumi means Roman, right? The name Rumi means Roman. And he is said to be, I think, Cappadocian or something, or to have been born in Constantinople, something like that. So he's said to have been born in the Byzantine Empire, allegedly, which is bullshit, obviously, because the Byzantine Empire never existed. But he did the same thing. And so the Provençal troubadours, they were writing love poems as an allegory for their religious experience and their religious desire and their desire to express their true faith, right? Things like that. So that became the gay science, the La Gaia Scienza, the joyful science, you know. That's what they called their craft. And that is also what we see in the Tarot de Marseille. The Tarot de Marseille is a joyful experience, right? It's different from other decks because it's not like the Visconti Sforza. The Visconti Sforza is an oppressive deck. It has an oppressive aesthetic. It has an ugly nature, right? It has something about it that is unsettling. While the Tarot de Marseille is like all the Tarot de Marseille. There are a lot of reconstructions and facsimiles and things like that, and they're all, I don't collect them because I don't think they're mostly the same, right? There are a few differences, but they're minute differences. But they all have this open-hearted, friendly nature. Obviously, it became very popular in northern Italy, southern France, and Spain. But I should also mention it became very popular in Switzerland, right? And I've mentioned Switzerland in my previous. That was back in December. I made a video about the Palatines, right? And I mentioned the Swiss there as well, because the Swiss and the Palatines, the Swiss were Palatines, right? And their patron saint was Saint Maurice, the Moor. And his the Legion of Thebes, who were all depicted as black Africans, but dressed in Germanic armors, right? In knightly raiments with spears and lances and flags, Holy Roman Imperial flags and stuff like that, right? So it has been postulated that the Tarot de Marseille is the nomadic cathedral. That is something that Jodorowsky has stated, and I found that one of the most, like, I had thought of that myself, and I hadn't even read his book yet when I had figured that out, because I was reading the Language of the Birds and the Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli. But this is exactly what the Tarot de Marseille is, right? It's a pocket cathedral. I've stated it in a previous video. You can, if you look at my deep dive on the Tarot de Marseille, you will be able to confirm that. By the way, in order to view some of my older videos, because I streamed them, I live streamed them back in the day. You can find them if you go to my channel and you go to live on the top. You will find them all there. You know, those are a bit longer than the more recent ones, but this one is going to be pretty long as well. So the Tarot de Marseille became a mass production. And there are many replicas and many defects as a result of that, and many different interpretations. You know, you have Type A, Type 1, and Type 2. Type 1 has Le Mat, and Type 2 has Le Folle or Le Fou. And Type 1 has the Cupid blindfolded, and Type 2 has the Cupid unblindfolded, with his eyes uncovered. Things like that, but those are minor differences. In my opinion, these are, not very important. Or at least these are up to interpretation or up to preference. But I think the essence of the Tarot de Marseille remains more or less the same across the board. So then we have the deniers and denarii and dinars, right? Which is another Arabic influence, right? The dirham is an Arabic currency. And then we have, got something stuck at underneath my lip. That was very annoying. And then we have il mato, right? Le mat in French, le mat. Which is another interesting term, because in Hebrew and in Arabic, mat means died. It's a past tense, by the way, and I can prove that. And it's funny too, because like in Arabic, it's like matan or something. Translated Google. Died. Mat. Right? You see it here. Died of. Matmin. Well, if we say death, for example, is mavd. I don't know how to pronounce it. Wait, let me listen. Multon. Okay, I don't know. Whatever. I don't know why they add the on at the end. That seems to be like a thing for them to be able to pronounce their words easier or something like that. But anyway, so mat means death. And it's the fool, right? And usually he's depicted like walking off a cliff or something, but that's a more modern interpretation. But what is interesting, and I can show it to you right away. Rider Waite. Right, I can show it to you Rider Waite. If we go to the fool, right? I've showed it before, right? The fool is unnumbered, right? And obviously, as I said before, the number 0 is an Arabic invention, or is introduced by the Arabs, allegedly, right? Again, we have no idea. If we consider that the Goths were the Arabs, then it may have been a local invention. Well, come on, where is he? Did I skip him? No. So he's unnumbered, but at the same time, death, the death card, right, which has a similar pose, is unnamed. So card 13, right, which indicates that, so they complement each other, right? the Fool, and 13. Right? And obviously 13 is an interesting number as well, because we have Friday the 13th, the day the Templars were persecuted, right? And stuff like that. But so it looks like Le Mat, the title Le Mat, belongs here as well. Well, the number 13 maybe doesn't belong here necessarily, because this is the 0 card, and it's unnumbered for a reason. But they are still connected, and you see they have a similar pose. So he has the staff like this, and he has the scythe like that. And obviously with the death card, it's a bit more ambiguous which foot is forward and which is back, but they're still in a similar pose, right? And obviously you can tell the death card is a little bit higher, right? But the difference is negligible, and obviously it looks higher as well because there's no label underneath. So these cards are complementary. So that's all language of the birds, in my opinion, right? The way I see it, Le Mat, the way they picked the word for death for the Fool, right? That's no coincidence. Because obviously being a fool is liable to get you killed, stuff like that. The Pope is obviously still persists in the Tarot de Marseille. The upside down Hanged Man and other misprints, you will find certain decks, and I can show you an example here with my Tarot de Marseille Millennium Edition, where he decided to keep that in, right? Because a lot of Marseille Tarot decks have a misprint with the Hanged Man, where they they added the number upside down, and so either the card has to be upside down, so the Hanged Man is standing on one foot, or the Hanged Man is hanging upside down and the number is wrong. So then it would be theoretically number 8, if you could even count Latin numerals that way, right? Wait, I can show it to you here. Sorry, haven't been here. Right, so you have the Hanged Man, Le Pendu, but number 12 seems to be backwards, right? If you turn it around, now it's correct, but now as you can see, it looks like he's standing, he's kind of levitating on one foot, but he's supposed to be hanging, but he's, like the ground is over his head, but it looks like he's standing because the number is underneath. But then the title of the card is upside down as well, so it's a bit weird, But he did that to preserve that tradition. But it's not a tradition, it's a misprint originally, obviously. So that's another of those things. La Maison Dieu, I've mentioned that before in previous videos, right? L'âme est son Dieu. L'âme est son Dieu. The soul and his God, or the soul and is its God. And the other thing that I wanted to mention as well is the lack of J's and U's, right? So we notice in the Tarot de Marseille that they still spell words the old way, the Latin way, right? La Maison Dieu. So the U. Wait, why do I keep forgetting this? La Maison Dieu, with a V at the end. L'amoureux. Or if we go to another example that's very interesting, l'impératrice. Wait, okay, so if we go to maybe Justice or Cavalier de Coupe. Where is it? We have plenty of U's that are depicted as V's, right? Because in Latin, the V and the U are interchangeable, right? Depending on which letters follow it, or which letters come before, it can be either a U or a V. And usually it's pretty... So for example here, this is the most interesting one. Justice, right? So here we have both the I replacing the J, let's see here, and the U replacing the V. But because it's a J and not an I, it becomes justice, or actually justice or justice, right? And we also have le jugement, and it's the same thing, I-V-G-E-M-E-N-T, and so on, right? So those are also, I believe, is a language of the birds kind of thing. And we have the lack of Arabic numerals, which I think is mostly just because the pips are so the pips are traditionally all numbered except for the coins, right? The coins are unnumbered, but they all have the Latin numerals. But so it seems to be deliberately ambiguous, right? And I think the lack of Arabic numerals is also purposeful because they try to hide the fact that it has this origin, right? The four suits, which is funny because the Sola Busca does the opposite, right? So the Sola Busca tarot has the Arabic numerals on the pips, which is, it's almost, how do you say? Almost like it's making fun of the other tarot decks. So now we have a few things to say about the four suits. Nothing much, but some stuff that I haven't mentioned in previous videos. So we also know, for example, that the Italian suits correspond to the four classes of society, right? So you have the swords that represent nobility and the military class. We have the cups that represent priesthood. We have the dinars, the deniers, that represent the mercantile class, and we have the batons, that represent the peasantry, right? The peasants and the workers. And we have the same correspondence in the French suits, which came later, but they're basically the same thing. The spades correspond to military, the hearts correspond to the priesthood, the diamonds correspond to merchants, and the clubs represent the peasants. So only later was it associated with ceremonial magic. So with the wand being the magic wand, the sword being the magician's sword, the denier, the coin, being the pentacle, which is completely ridiculous because it's a completely impractical tool to have. It's only, you have like a wooden block or a pentacle to cut your herbs on or whatever, big fucking deal. And the cup representing the cup. On the other hand, though, I believe the spades are connected to... I've talked about this previously in my deep dive on the palatines, right? The spades are connected to the root pala, right? The pala in Spanish means the shovel. In Arabic is the sword. It's a sword in Turkish. It seems to be connected to the palatines, right? And I've played the song before about the Moorsoldaten with their spades digging through the bog, right? Through the moor. Things like that. So there are a lot of connections there. This is also a very language of the birds. That's why I made this slide to kind of point these things out a bit as well. Denier, denari, dirham, drachm, drachmi in Greek, is the Arabic currency. We still have the drachmi in well, we don't have it anymore. Like we used to have it when I was a kid. We still had the drachmi before the euro was introduced in 2001. So, and they claim obviously that the drachmi was the original Greek coin, but I think it was Arabic. But there was this other connection that I made with the dinar and the denar and the denier, right? The dinar in Dutch or dina in German means servant. Dienst is service, right? And a dinar is a servant. And in English we have denier, the denier, he who denies. Obviously if you don't have money, you're not going to get the product, right? So you're not going to get an exchange. So access denied. You know, so that's all language of the birds, right? That wasn't planned. That's not how the language evolved. But still, these meanings are still permeating through our language. And obviously, an exchange is a service as well, right? So, for example, when I'm doing customer service, in Dutch we call it klantendienst. Een dienstverlening. I'm how do you say? I'm providing a service. Cups are clearly inspired by the grill, either way you cut it. Whether you interpret it as a ceremonial thing or as a cultural thing, because obviously the priesthood in church, in mass, they also have a big cup with the communion, with the sacrament. And then the wands, the staves, the clubs, the cudgels, magic wands, walking canes, etc. Right? So it's a tool for to help you walk, a tool for self-defense, a tool to a weapon, things like that. So I have this slide about the Belgian and Swiss tarots, and the only reason I bring these up is because they show some interesting variants in what they've done to circumvent certain regional laws, right? So, for example, instead of the Popus here, we have le Capitán Español, the Spanish captain. I don't remember what his name was. Wait, I can look it up, by the way. Sorry about that. That was very improper. I'm sorry. So the Belgian tarot, right? Capitano so this is weird because it's an E, but I think it's fracas or fracassé. Capitano fracassé. L'Espagnol Capitano fracassé. So, and he's some kind of character from some kind of theater. And then we have Bacchus instead of the Pope, which is arguably even worse. So I don't know what laws they were trying to circumvent, but this is basically making it worse. And then we have the Swiss tarot, which has it has Juno and Jupiter instead. Let me see. Right, so we have Juno instead of the priestess, the Popus. Which is funny, by the way, because Juno, I think Juno is Athena, right? And then we have Jupiter instead of the Pope. Which is funny because it's basically the same as the Emperor and the Empress. The Herrscher, the Empress, Juno. So yeah. Interesting, but I actually don't really like either of those. But yeah. And then I wanted to touch upon the Spanish tarot and the Kabbalah. And I've talked about this before. I've made a whole video about this, so please check out my previous video on Fournier. But yeah, based on the Ligurian Piedmontese deck, first printed in 1736. Fairly conventional Marseille-style tarot, but the knights are referred to as caballo, i.e. horses. Right, so caballo, normally it should be caballero, right? I think. Let me check just in case I'm not entirely stupid. Knight. Caballero, right? El caballo. Horse hack, right? And you see it here as well, they've added it. So apparently maybe they call knights caballos as well. But normally it says here horse, it doesn't say knight, so it's a bit weird. But my theory is that they specifically chose the word caballo to accentuate the fact that for them, in the Spanish tradition, the tarot is connected to the Kabbalah. But, and I have had this talk with my friend, Pirate47, about the Kabbalah being the code of chivalry of Islam, the Futuwa. And obviously, we know that the Jews of Spain, they spoke Arabic, right? And so there's a lot of, and there was a lot of how do you say, interaction between the two groups in Spain, in Andalusia. A lot of cultural exchange, let's say. So possibly there might be a Kabbalistic influence from the Jews of Spain. It might be connected to chivalry, to the chivalric code, which would connect it back to the Provençal troubadours and all that stuff, right? And obviously this is the language of the birds, but this is using Spanish as its base rather than French or Arabic, Okay, so we're nearing the end. Now we have Antoine Cour de Gébelin and Eteillat. Well, Antoine Cour de Gébelin was a French-Swiss Protestant pastor, and he was a Huguenot as well, which is funny because we talked about the Huguenots before, and that's why I bring it up. From Nîmes, from southern France, right? So he was also from southern France. So all that stuff, I don't think that's coincidence, right? But at the same time, personally, I think he messed up, right? So he encountered the tarot deck. He was a Protestant pastor, but I think he claimed that he, when he encountered it, he knew that he had the mysteries of the Egyptians in his hands, and things like that. And so he interpreted it as the Book of Thought, a pictorial edition of the pictorial version, translation of the Book of Thought. And obviously, within 2 years, another guy, Jean-Baptiste Aliette, took the idea and ran with it. And he was the first to write a divination manual, allegedly, which is false, by the way, because as I noted earlier, the first divination manual historically that was written for the Tarocco Bolognese. But from that day on, Hermeticism becomes integral to modern tarot. It becomes an occult tool, so the interpretations of the cards start to shift towards the Kabbalah, towards astrology and all that stuff. Well, before it was much more ambiguous, right? And as I said before, it was a deliberate sort of ambiguity. And obviously, Eliphas Levi delivers the coup de grâce. So he, after he wrote his book on magic. Basically, the game was over. Basically, well, that's my pessimistic interpretation because I personally don't really like these associations. But we'll get to that. So, history repeats itself in the 20th century. A few words about the Rider-Waite-Smith and the Thought Tarot. Right, we have the Golden Dawn and Golden Dawn versus Thelema. Right, there were some some differences between those groups, some conflicts. Obviously, Thelema came later, about 40 years later, 50 years maybe even. But so, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck was developed in 1909, based on Rosicrucian principles. That's what I look. I don't believe the assertion that Arthur Edward Waite was a Christian mystic, right? I don't believe that. He was a Hermeticist. He was an occultist, and he was a Rosicrucian. He was a member of the Golden Dawn. So that's what informed his tarot. The pips were inspired by the Solabusca. As we've seen before, there are some examples, like the Ten of Swords in the Solabusca looks a lot like the Ten of Wands in the Rider-Waite-Smith. But either, things like that. The Three of Swords looks a lot like, is the same as the Three of Swords in the Rider-Waite-Smith. But obviously some things have been changed around. And obviously she also, Pamela Coleman-Smith added her own interpretations to some of the pips and her own depictions. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck was then refined by Paul Foster Case. I have my Bota deck as well. I've showed it before, so it might not... Yeah, I can't find it right now, but I have a Bota deck as well, but I'm not supposed to show it anyway. I colored it myself and stuff. You can only get it black and white if you buy the whole deck, by the way. I can advise you to get it. It's an interesting experience to color in your own deck. But Paul Foster Case, he especially the major arcana are very much based on the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. He keeps the numbering from the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition as well. So Justice is number 8 and Strength is number 11. And you have to understand that this change started with Arthur Edward Waite, right? It started with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's the only deck that does that. That and the Bota Tarot. And all the ones that are Rider-Waite-Smith copies and copycats. Right? All others use the normal numbering. So Justice is number 8, Strength is number 11. Sorry, did I say it the other way around? No, sorry. Rider-Waite-Smith has Justice as number 11 and Strength as number 8. That's the correct one. Right? So in the Tarot de Marseille... Sorry, now I'm making it even worse. Okay, so once again. Rider-Waite-Smith has Strength as number 8, Justice as number 11. That is incorrect. That is the incorrect numbering. The correct numbering is Justice at number 8, Strength at number 11. That's what the Tarot de Marseille uses. That's what the correct tradition is. So just to be completely 100% clear, the Arthur Edward Waite interpretation, the Rider-Waite-Smith interpretation, the Bota interpretation is incorrect. Okay, glad we got that out of the way. So Paul Foster Case refines the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, adds more symbols, makes it even more explicit. It looks very pretty, but honestly, to me, all that symbolism is a bit redundant because and it's funny too because they say it themselves. The whole point of it is suggestion. Right, but like he makes it explicit. He removes the suggestion from whatever suggestion there was in the tarot. Right, the Tarot de Marseille is the most suggestive deck because the symbolism is ambiguous. Exactly because the symbolism is ambiguous. Right, the more explicit you make it, the less suggestive it becomes. So it's kind of like defeating the purpose. They remove the pip illustrations from the Bota deck, but they keep the numbering, as I said. Then after that, actually before that even, because this one was published in 47, but in 44, Crowley has already published the Thought Tarot, painted by Lady Frida Harris. And it's funny how they all, the brain, the mastermind behind it is a guy and the artist is a woman. That's it's with all these decks. That's the same phenomenon. So Jesse Burns Park. This should have been a capital. Jesse Burns Park is not Jesse Burns Park. And with Crowley is Lady Frida Harris, right? So she painted the Thought Tarot. It also includes non-pictorial pips, but they are pictorial, but they aren't really. They're more like pip cards, but they have all these colors and things happening. They correct the numbering of the major arcana, but in exchange they introduce a whole bunch of other concepts that were completely alien to the tarot initially. So strength becomes the lust card, temperance becomes art, and justice becomes adjustment, and the world becomes the universe, and the judgment becomes the aeon, and all this fucking bullshit, right? Anyway, that's my opinion. I don't like that stuff. I like the Tarot de Marseille. Call me a purist, which is funny because it's like, the tarot has been a heretic fucking tool. How do you say, meditation tool from the very beginning, but I don't like this fucking heresy, right? I like my purist fucking heresy. So anyway, that's just my taste. I don't like this association with like Lady Babylon and Baphomet and all that crap, that's just not, it's too edgy for my taste. That's just how I feel about it. Okay, so he introduces a bunch of Babylonian concepts, emphasizes astrological and Kabbalistic correspondences. And the funny thing is, I do believe that even though Pamela Coleman Smith actually has some concrete inspirations that she took over from the Sola Busca, the Thought Tarot is actually the modern Sola Busca Tarot, right? It's really that priestly, clerical, hierophantic tarot, that's based on the occult mysteries and all these, these people who perform child sacrifices and to appease the gods and all that stuff and all that fucking, black magic. And I mean, Crowley, plays around with those concepts and he pretends to not, be into that stuff, but like, you can tell, and you can read his books, and he says it explicitly, more or less, that the best sacrifice is like a newborn boy and stuff like that. And he says it. Only people try to explain it away, that that he's talking about semen and stuff like that, which he also used, but that doesn't mean that he still doesn't believe that child sacrifice is the most effective sacrifice, right? So even if he never used it in his life, he still believes that is the optimal method, right? And that is what informs these cards. So let's just be honest and just take them with a grain of salt, okay? So he changes the court cards around as well. So now the king becomes the knight, the queen remains as she is. The knight becomes the prince, and the page becomes the princess, right? So everything becomes like, and then, so yeah. So the Rider-Waite-Smith and the Thought Tarot obviously become the most widespread and widely copied text. Obviously, the Rider-Waite-Smith becomes more widely copied, but the Thought Tarot is one of the most widespread. So yeah. But the way what I mean now with the history repeats itself in the 20th century is that we see the same thing happening, right? So in a way, the Rider-Waite-Smith is a revival of the Marseille tradition, while in a way the Thought Tarot, the Crowley Tarot, is a revival of the Sola Busca. But at the same time, both, because there's no more resistance from the church, no more persecution per se, they both are free to express themselves in like much more extreme ways, right? So the occult elements become explicit, and they become much more, much less suggestive, in my opinion, right? They become much more, on the one hand they're more exuberant, but on the other they lose all sense of, of moderation, right? The Tarot de Marseille, I like the Tarot de Marseille because it's, it is discreet, right? And these decks don't have any discretion anymore. They're too loud. They're too, too extravagant, right? Again, it's a matter of taste. That's how I feel about this. So, some conclusions. And here's where it gets strange, right? Well, it's already been strange all this time. We've been going for 2 hours plus, so let's just finish this. We have 2 more slides and we'll be done. There seems to be 2 parallel streams in the history of tarot, right? And as I explained before, I believe those are the Arabic stream, and we'll take Arabic with the how do you say, with the reformed sense of the words, as Fomenko introduced, or as as we have to conclude that from Fomenko's philosophy that Arabic means, right? So a purely European, North African, this. So how do I say this? Because, for example, right, there are people who say that the word Arabic actually just means wise, the wise man, or the educated, right, the literate man, right? So it's the same, it's cognate to rabbi, right? So it's not necessarily, it's not a nationalistic word. It doesn't refer to to an ethnic group. It refers to a class of people, right? And the other is the Phoenician, right? And again, now it gets complicated again, because I'm trying to apply this same non-ethnic terminology to Phoenician as a counterpoint to the Arabic one, right? But you could call it like the white magic and black magic, or you could call it the maritime and the that's what I do like that. So right, the Phoenician one is the maritime culture, while the Arabic is the horse riding culture, the nomadic culture, right? That's where the difference lies, right? So the Marseille is chivalric, and the Rider Waite Smith, that's why it's called Rider Waite Smith, right? That's also language of the birds, right? That's not why it's called that, but that's why I call it that. While the Phoenician, the Sola Busca, and the Thought Tyro is how do you say, is chthonic, is abyssal, right? It comes from the abyss, from the bottom of the sea, from this Cthulhu like kind of, from the old ones, from the Nagas and all that stuff, So Tyro from the serpentine bloodline, right? From the draconic bloodline. And you could see it in bloodlines as well, right? So I believe that, right? I mean, I believe that. I'm playing with those beliefs, right? Because the Marseille Tarot comes from the Merovingian mythos, from the Merovingian bloodline, from the Messianic bloodline, while the Sola Busca Tarot comes from the Draconic bloodline, from the Pharaonic bloodline, from the Phoenician bloodline, right? So that's kind of the distinction I want to make. So let's say Leviathan versus I don't know who beats Leviathan. I don't know, Michael, Archangel Michael, or something like that. That's the kind of dichotomy I'm trying to get at. Tarot is intrinsically connected with Gnosticism and heretical beliefs from the very beginning. And with heretical, obviously, I'm trying to be, because obviously both the pre-Christian Gnosticism as well as the Christian Gnosticism are both heretical, right? But obviously in Greek, heresy simply means choice. You have free choice, you have free will. You're able to choose what you believe. So a heresy is not necessarily something bad, but obviously the implication is that one of these two sides is bad, right? In my opinion. The Catholic Church has attempted to suppress the tarot, but there seem to have been instances where it has attempted to co-opt it. And that's what I mean with the Sola Busca, for example, because I believe the Catholic Church, the Vatican, descends from this draconic bloodline. It comes from the Khazarians, it comes from the Pharisees, from the Phanariots. It comes straight from Byzantium to Venice and to Rome, and it founded these maritime empires, and it tries to control the world, and it starts, and it does so through violence and terrorism, right? And through blackmail and how do you say? and gaslighting, right? Because they steal your history from right underneath your feet. That's what they did. They rewrote the Roman history. I should also mention what Rome means, right? So in Arabic, you have the word Rum. The Romans are mentioned in the Quran and stuff. They call them the Rum, right? I mentioned Rumi earlier, right? Rum in Arabic means the pomegranate. Pirate had mentioned that before as well, right? And what's the capital of Andalusia in Spain called today, nowadays? It's called Granada. Granada is Rum, is the pomegranate, right? So they've co-opted the term Rome, and they don't even know what to do with it. Now it's like Romulus and Remus, and they were fed by the wolf, by they were. It's fucking bullshit. The Enlightenment enabled free distribution, but not before the tarot was already co-opted. That's what I believe, right? And my belief is that the Rider-Waite Smith and the Thought Tarot are corruptions of the tarot, and it has already been co-opted by occult, by secret societies, and what I mean by that is by dark societies, right? By evil societies. The tarot is an egregore, is conflicted and fallible, right? It's not a divine tool. It's a living book of knowledge, and I've talked about this in my previous video, right? Each replication is an aggregate of cultural collective experiences, good and bad. Paul Foster Case calls it the game of man, right? And Paul Foster Case was right on that front, in the same way that Jodorowsky was right saying that it's the nomadic cathedral. It has evolved in parallel to human history, reflecting our hopes and dreams, our fears and wishes. Sorry, I changed the order there, but it doesn't matter, right? So what I'm trying to say is, the tarot has evolved parallel to us. It has, through the years, it has been marked by our, different philosophies that have changed through the ages, have evolved, by our experiences, by our suffering, by our happiness, by our hopes and dreams and stuff like that. But that also makes it human in a way. The tarot is not infallible, right? It has its own conflicts. It has its own traumas it needs to deal with. And when we're engaging with the tarot, it's like we're talking to a human being. It's like we're talking to our friends and asking them for advice, but we're both flawed. And we're both, maybe in one instance he may be able to help me, but maybe he doesn't know either, and that's the issue we run into with the tarot, and that's the way it should be. Don't get me wrong. But that's why there's different numbering systems. That's why sometimes there's tarot decks with more cards or with fewer cards. Stuff like that. The numbering of the majors, and this is an important one. The numbering of the majors suggests the Fibonacci sequence. Right, so the highest number in the tarot, the highest singular number in the tarot, is the number 21. The second highest number in the frequency, in the Fibonacci frequency, is 13, which is the unnamed card. So, and I discovered this while writing my poker book, but I'll leave that to you to discover for yourself. But I believe that the major arcana and the major and minor arcana are meant to intertwine. And actually, I don't like any tarot practice. I don't trust any tarot practice that only uses the major arcana. Just use all the cards, find a system, find a way to make it work, or don't use the tarot at all. But so, if you combine them, you can get a spread that follows the Fibonacci frequency. If you go from 1-1, you can have two aces. 1-1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And obviously it goes up to 21 max. That's because we only have 78 cards. Otherwise we could have added more maybe. And then lastly, we have one more spread. One more spread. One more slide. Can the tarot be healed? Now, this is a challenging question. This is something I just thought of today, right? What if the tarot is a living being? What if it suffers from all this trauma, from all this persecution, all these heretical beliefs, all these conflicting beliefs, right? You have the Sola Busca and you have the Marseille, you have the Rider-Waite-Smith and you have the Thought Tarot. You have, you have heretical beliefs. You have the church trying to suppress the tarot. You have games. You have divination. You have all this stuff. What are the consequences of all its endless replication? Platonic versus mimetic, right? Is there an ideal tarot that we can create at some point? Or is it all just replication of itself, and do we find its value in its flaws? Is tarot a game or an occult implement? Can we get to the bottom of the phantom years through tarot? To the bottom of the new chronology? Is there a Tartarian connection to the tarot? I think... personally, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that there is. The language of the birds. Tarot, Rota, Torah, Orat, Ator, Hathor. Right? Why, for example, is the most common question related to love and relationships, right? Hathor is the goddess of love of Egypt. Who knows? Maybe that's related, Maybe that's the egregore that lives on through the tarot. Egyptian, Babylonian, Arabian, European. Is there an original tarot? I don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. I personally don't think it matters all that much. But I do think this idea is valuable. I do think there is, just to close, I had a dream recently, last weekend, about a living grimoire, right? That was calling out for help, basically. And I honestly believe, it was suffering. It was like like the meme of the biblically accurate angels, But the wings were folded into pages, into this book. And it was kind of looking at me and kind of bleeding. And like its blood smelled like sugar. So it was like, how do you say? It was like cotton candy, So the sugar permeated the atmosphere. And I was trying to breathe. And it was calling out for help. And I believe that dream was about the tarot, And I believe... if there's one thing we can say about the tarot, it is a living being. Even if we take it purely as a meme, as a mimetic structure, a mimetic structure is a primitive form of life. An egregore, And as an egregore, it might have its own personality. And maybe that's different per deck. Or maybe it's the tarot as a whole is an even greater compound, and maybe it has its own complexes that need to be resolved. It has its own trauma. It has its own problems, and maybe we shouldn't be taking its answers for granted, but maybe we shouldn't discount it either. Maybe there's something to gain from resolving that trauma. Because I think there's a lot to that, because the history of tarot has been far from uneventful, So yeah, these were my thoughts on the history of tarot. I hope this was informative. We've been going for 2 hours and 19 minutes. So I'm gonna call it tonight. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and peace. I'll see you around. Bye-bye.